Shrouded by night but with steady stride, coloured by blood but always clear of mind, proud unto the church. Beasts are accursed and curses a shackle, only ye the true blades of the church. Shrouded by night but with steady stride, coloured by blood but always clear of mind, proud unto the church. Beasts are accursed and curses a shackle, only ye the true blades of the church.
Well, look who's here. Welcome to my quarters. I've never entertained a guest before. Are you going to kill me? After all you've done, kill me? As if to right your wrongs.
Hello everyone, this is Aegon of Astora, and welcome back to Bloodborne Let's Talk Lore. This is episode 20, being recorded on Tuesday the 16th of February. I hope you're all having a fantastic day today, whenever it is you find yourself watching this. So, I figured we might as well spend this episode dealing with several of the loose ends that have become obvious upon rewatching the last couple of episodes. Some things that we've yet to take care of, but that we're gonna try and do in this episode. And that begins, of course, here.
Shrouded by night but with steady stride, coloured by blood but always clear of mind, proud unto the church. Beasts are accursed and curses a shackle, only ye the true blades of the church.
Now, of course, we have the key to this cell. We were here earlier, but we did not have the key. The description for which reads, "Key to the cell below the Grand Cathedral. Hunters are held within the underground cells so that things better left unseen and knowledge better left unknown will decay quietly in the fallow darkness."
Shrouded by night but with steady stride, coloured by blood but always clear of mind, proud unto the church. Beasts are accursed and curses a shackle, only ye the true blades of the church.
So I don't really know what to think about this, but
Shrouded by night, only
Yamamura here is doing the exact same thing that one patient is in the research hall. That one research subject, I should say. Just banging his head against the wall. And repeating the same seemingly nonsensical phrases over and over again. Yamamura Hunter Hat, Kaki Heori, Old Hunter Armbands, and Wine Hakama. Yamamura Hunter Hat, a standard hunter's hat worn by Yamamura, the Wanderer. This hat and staff were given to him when he became a hunter and confederate of the League. Kaki Heori, garb of a distant eastern land, worn by Yamamura, the Wanderer. This eastern warrior pursued a beast for honorable revenge, then became a hunter of the League. But when he stared straight into impurity, it drove him mad. Old hunter armbands wound tightly to prevent infection with the scourge. Of course, the idea that the scourge was infectious was pure hearsay. And wine hakama, garb of a distant eastern land, worn by Yamamura the Wanderer. This eastern warrior pursued a beast for honorable revenge, then became a hunter of the League. So, same item description once again. Which is reminiscent of this story here. Once upon a time, a troop of foreign constables chased a beast all the way to Yharnam, and this is what they wore. The constables became victims of the beast, except for one survivor, who in turn devoured the creature whole, all by himself. This fable is a favorite among Yharnamites, who are partial to any stories of pompous, intolerant foreigners who suffer for their ignorance. It makes the blood taste that much sweeter. So I can't recall where I heard this first suggested, but it would seem as though Yamamura may have been one of the hunters. A troop. How many does that refer to? I want to say that's 3, but it might actually be more. That, yeah, Yamamura in any case might have been one of those hunters. And this is one among several NPCs we're going to be trying to place in the course of this episode. So that's just the first. And you can see, in stark contrast to the Brador we find in his cell, or in his quarters, I should say. In stark contrast to that Brador, this one, his beard looks to be brown or dark brown, black, something like that. It's not great. This is a younger Brador, the one who invades us. And yeah, I made sure to reflect that in the build that you saw in the intro leading up to this. Or at least the build you will have seen later on in the episode. Brador's testimony. The scalp of a horrible cleric beast, indicating that Hunter Brador, a Healing Church assassin, had killed a compatriot. Afterward, he wore his ally's own scalp and hid himself away deep below in a cell. The church provided him with a single, soundless bell of death to ensure their secrets would be kept. So I think it's really important that it says Brador hid himself away, not that he was hidden or placed out of sight, but that indeed he is keeping the secret that is himself and everything that that implies. Note also, before we get to Brador, that Oh, and I still haven't repurchased the lantern after having to demonstrate that it wasn't just a bug with those beast patients. Note also that Brador seems to have killed these enemies here. Before we progress to the point where we begin hearing Brador's bell, these enemies respawn, and now they're just permanently dead. This one's even ragdolled to suggest that, yeah, he might have been killed very recently, very soon in advance of our arrival. And this one has no ragdoll at all, but he's in a wheelchair, so recall that is Gratia there. And also, some frenzied cold blood. I honestly don't remember which cells contain what, so that tension you're feeling is real. So that enemy, per the guide, is just named Yahargal Hunter. Church Pick, one of the old trick weapons of the Healing Church. A hunting weapon formed from one of the giant picks that appear in old beast tales. The Church Pick initially serves as a large sword, but when transformed, functions as an extended war pick. In spite of its origins, it is a highly practical weapon. So that's one of several weapons we're going to have to test out very soon. But first...
Well, look who's here. Welcome to my quarters. I've never entertained a guest before. Are you going to kill me? After all you've done, kill me? As if to right your wrongs.
Recall first that in the previous episode we talked a bit about Redgrave's video on the Hunter's origin. And I mentioned that the line of dialogue that Redgrave was... One of the lines of dialogue he used to support his assertion that, you know, Brador knows us.
Are you a hunter? Well, that's very odd.
But there was also the dialogue that we just heard.
Are you going to kill me? After all you've done, kill me? As if to right your wrongs.
Where he says, after all that you've done, as if to right your wrongs, you're going to kill me. So that could be interpreted in that way, after all you've done. But I think it's more likely that his reaction to us being a hunter and saying that that's odd. In the first place, I think that that piece of dialogue suggests more that He's confused at the fact that we are a Paleblood hunter in the Hunter's Nightmare, and that we're not drunk with blood. Much like Simon, we are in there, but we don't belong. We don't belong in this Hunter's Nightmare. It wasn't meant for us. But because we were carrying the eye of a blood-drunk hunter, for the simple reason that we were carrying this eye, the Nightmare has mistaken us for being the owner of this eye, for this being our eye. Thus, when he says, that's odd, that, in response to the fact that we're a hunter and we're here, and that we're seemingly just normal, that seems to be more just a general, that's odd, as opposed to a specific, that's odd. You're a hunter now? I don't think the latter is as much as what he was getting after as the former. But that aside, he also mentions, that, after all you've done, I think once again that's more of a general commentary on what it is to be a hunter, and how, if you're a hunter, that means that you've done some really nasty, you've been forced to do some pretty nasty, morally questionable stuff, and often morally repugnant stuff, full stop. But, so I think that he just knows that as a hunter, we've done a lot of shit. He just knows that by virtue of the fact that we're hunters, not necessarily because he knows who we are. Although that does remain a distinct possibility, and a very interesting one at that. The second thing he mentioned is that he didn't say welcome to my cell. He said welcome to my quarters. And indeed, you'll notice that there are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 beds in here. And that these are the cells. And that we're not currently standing in the cell. We appear to be standing in the guards' quarters. For whenever this was a functional prison. Because if you go up to the top of the stairs here, you see, that this area is behind, whatever front gate, if there was one that existed. Then there's a second one. And then the third one down here. So 3 doors, suggesting to me that this is probably where the guards congregated. And in addition to that this is probably also where they kept the most damned prisoners. The ones who had committed the most egregious of crimes against the Healing Church, I guess. I hesitate to use the word crimes because I can't imagine that it was the most equitable judicial system, if you can even describe it as that. But this does appear to be where they kept prisoners. Although, in the context of this DLC, those two can more or less be used as synonyms. But yeah, so he's not really, he hasn't been imprisoned here. If anything, he's imprisoned, he's forced himself into exile. Because again, this isn't, we're not standing in a prison cell right now. We're standing in what appears to be the guards' quarters. The administrative center of this prison. And yeah, he's just there ringing his bell. Passing his time by invading other people who are approaching the truth, I guess, of who he is and what he does and his place within the church.
What is it? Aren't you going to kill me? Or perhaps beg my forgiveness? Well, leave off. What's done is done. What is it? Oh, creatures. Such is the nature of man.
Bloodletter, the demented hunter weapon brandished by Brador, the Healing Church assassin. The Bloodletter assumes its true and terrifying form after it draws upon blood from the inner reaches of one's body and soul. This is the only effective means of expelling tainted blood, or so Brador, isolated in his cell, continued to believe. So the way this weapon works mechanically would appear to, at least to some degree, support everything that, not Redgrave, sorry, JSF and I talked about in the previous episode. If you didn't see the part in the episode where we explained bloodletting in depth and we talked about the four humors and the humoral theory of disease, I would highly recommend going back to the previous episode and checking that out. If you look in the video description, you'll see a list of topics, and you should be able to navigate to that topic rather easily. But I think it's very important, the humoral theory of disease and you know, a historical understanding of bloodletting is very important for understanding this weapon and its mechanics. Although, I don't know how to explain the fact that whatever it is that we were extracting, whatever the tainted blood was that we were extracting from our body and soul, as the description says, it appears to imbue the weapon with some sort of life. And why do I say that? Well, watch this. You can see not only does the charged R2 attack kind of spit out blood, but you can see the blood coursing through what seems to be the veins of the weapon. So yeah, it's pretty weird. But there were a couple other things I wanted to talk about as well. And it seemed rather fitting that we began here, based on what JSF and I discussed in the previous episode. And that is, this would appear to be a snapshot of sorts, or a reflection of the Grand Cathedral at a certain point in time. At a point in time in the past, it would seem. That as we progress through the DLC from the beginning to the end, we would seem to be going from the, not the present, but the present time as at the beginning of the DLC, which is at a much earlier point than the present in the main game. But that we start from that point in time, and that we actually go backwards, although right now we're actually going forwards in time by going backwards, if that makes any sense. And that I don't think this is meant to be 100% literal, but that the point at which we complete the DLC with cost, so that would appear to be to some degree ground zero in a lot of this. And there are other ways of looking at it, but that is one way that you can look at it, with the body of costs washing up on that shore, that being sort of the ground zero of the story. And that as we traverse backwards through the DLC, back to the beginning, that we come closer and closer to the present day. And that the river of blood would seem to be a representation of that temporal space in between those 2 points in time. The point in time of the Grand Cathedral where we just were, and the point in time of the Grand Cathedral where we're headed. And that would be supported by the fact that we find Lawrence's human skull here, and that in the other Grand Cathedral we find Lawrence as a beast. And so if you look at it in that way, it's really, really interesting how the DLC serves almost like an exhibit you would see at a museum, like a diorama of, you know, the history of the Healing Church. From Kos being the thing that sparked its initial formation, to, you know, the images, dual images of Ludwig and Lawrence as being horrific beasts. What's really interesting about these guys as well is that not only I got a closer look at their faces while invading with my Brador build, and not only do you see that the effect that kind of covers their face is that same cosmos type effect, so that their faces could be thought of in a sense as being sort of a portal, a window into the cosmos. But they also wear bells around their necks. And I can't recall if when JSF and I, when we were talking about that in the previous episode, and I don't even remember if that part actually got into the final episode, because it was over 5 hours edited down to 3. But I do recall at one point us discussing the bells and which enemies have them, and I don't seem to recall these guys being included among the group that had them. Whoops. Because that serves me right for switching. Every time I switch, I try a weapon other than the saw cleaver, I wound up regretting it. Alright, well, let's continue exploring this diorama, because I think it's quite fascinating once you look at it from that perspective. So we just left the one Grand Cathedral, which represents an earlier point in time than the one to which we're headed. Okay. That did not go as well as I had planned. I'm a little rusty. I have not played very much Bloodborne at all lately. So, so I'm a tad rusty. But yeah, so this is a shortcut leading back to the beginning area, so I just came over here for a second so I could catch my breath. And so that is the end point, temporarily. If we were going in chronological as opposed to reverse chronological order. Because the DLC appears to me to be in reverse chronological order. Whereas if you're following the river backwards, then it's the other way around. Let's try this one more time. Almost used Yosefka's blood vial, and that would have been bad because I have a very specific plan for what I want to do with that in the next couple episodes. Okay, thank you, finally. So the point I wanted to make, before I was so rudely interrupted by getting my ass kicked, is that, yeah, once again, that you could look at this river as representing the flow of time, and that the bodies in the river as sort of representing the number of people who died in the course of that history unfolding. So we've talked a bit about, you know, the whether or not there's any consciousness to the beast patients, but also whether there's any consciousness to the people in the River of Blood. And if I had to guess, I would guess probably not. And there are, of course, a number of valid ways of looking at this, but in my view, I think the most interesting way of looking at it is that this river it's, you know, a symbolic representation of the flow of time between the two grand cathedrals. And another thing I wanted to look into as well, and it's going to be very tough to, because there's a lot of moving parts here, although I think I might actually be too late to even test this out. Yeah, I am, crud. I wanted to test out whether or not Djura's ally, whether or not he was coded as an ally to the beasts in here, because I've been thinking about why it is that he's here. So if I'm correct, and if all three of Djura's companions are accounted for, that the first one is the one we find from whom we loot the Old Yharnam Hunter set, or the not Old Yharnam Hunter set, the Charred Hunter set. That the second person is the one we find at the bottom of Djura's ladder, and that the third person was the guy from whom we got the chain gun. This is a highly customized portable version of the stationary Gatling gun operated by the old hunter Djura in Old Yharnam. It was the weapon of choice of the youngest of Djura's three companions. The Gatling gun boasts exceptional rapid firing function, blah 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 blah. So it was the weapon of choice of the youngest of Djura's three companions. So that judging by the fact that, yeah, he's the only one who uses it, he's the person who drops it for us, that would seem to be the youngest of Djura's 3 companions. But why is he here while the companion from whom we loot the set was seemingly allowed to peacefully die? The next companion is there with Djura in Old Yharnam, watching out for the beasts, and coded as an ally to the beasts. Why is this guy here? Because I can't recall where I read this, but I read someone suggesting somewhere that this guy is protecting the beasts in the cave. But it would seem more likely that if he's a blood-drunk hunter, and if he's here, it's just as likely that, you know, he's not protecting them as he is terrorizing them in some way, shape, or form. Keeping them trapped in the cave for some reason. I think there might be some more symbolism at play there that I've not really been able to notice, or I've not been able to tease out as of yet. But I don't know. That's something I've been thinking about a lot. And what I wanted to test there was whether or not, if you lured him towards the beast, whether or not the beast would attack him, or vice versa. Because that would tell us, if in fact he was attacking the beast, that would tell us definitively that no, he's not. Maybe not definitively, but pretty close, that he's not, in fact, you know, coded as an enemy to the beast. But yeah, of course the River of Blood doesn't lead directly to the other Grand Cathedral, but it is, you know, it's stated in the item description for that key item that there are 2 cathedrals in the Hunter's Dream. One lies past the River of Blood, and another contains the private hall of the private research hall of the Healing Church. Only chosen members of the Healing Church or their lamentable patients can enter the research hall using this eye. So yeah, the 2 cathedrals are linked by the River of Blood, even though it's not direct. That one lies past it, so there's one there, and then the other one right somewhere there. So yeah, I don't know what to think about all this, but it's you know, I wasn't quite ready to record today, at least not in the same way that I was for the previous episode, but the previous episode took so much time to put together that it really kind of put me behind on other things and led to kind of the brief and temporary hiatus that I had to take from the channel for a couple weeks. So, but you know, while I'm thinking these things through, I did want to ask each of you what your thoughts are. Okay, next order of business, we have a rune to equip, or more accurately, an oath to equip, or an oath to swear. Milkweed, a Carol rune envisioned by Adeline, patient of the research hall. A transcription of the inhuman sticky whispers that reveal the nature of a celestial attendant. Those who take this oath become a lumen wood that peers towards the sky, feeding phantasms in its luscious bed. Phantasms guide us and lead to further discoveries. So you'll notice if you saw the most recent episode of my Dark Souls 1 casual playthrough, that I drew a connection between the Lumen Wood and the Egghead transformation. Because yeah, it appears to more or less cover the same spots on the model. So I don't think that necessarily means anything, but it seems like they use more or less the same programming or the same mechanics for this one as they did for that one. Something else I missed while JSF and I were recording, but that I heard while editing the footage, was that he, if you'll recall from the previous episode, I drew attention to the fact that this would seem to be a reference to the Hunter's Mark. And something that he pointed out that I failed to acknowledge at the time was also that it doesn't have a head. And so keep that in mind.
Was black and white, blasphemous murderers, blood-crazed fiends. Atonement for the wretches by the wrath of Mother Goss. Mercy for the poor wizened child. Mercy. Oh, please. Curse here, curse there. A curse for he and she. White hair. A bottomless curse. A bottomless sea. Source of all greatness. All things that be. Listen for the baneful chants. Weep with them as one in trance. And weep with us. Oh, weep with us.
Skull of a local from the violated fishing village. The inside of the skull was forcibly searched for eyes, as evidenced by innumerable scratches and indentations. No wonder the skull became stewed in curses. They who offer baneful chants, weep with them, as one in trance.
Burning was black and white, blasphemous murderers, blood-crazed fiends. Atonement for the wretches by the wrath of Mother Goss. Mercy for the poor wizened child. Mercy. Oh, please.
So as usual, I would like to thank everyone sincerely for leaving something like 140, 160 comments in the comments section for the previous episode, which is, once again, for the 4th or 5th episode in a row, is a record. So thank you, everyone. But as a byproduct of that, I hope you all know that I appreciate your comments very, very much, even if I'm not able to read them all on the show. So thank you very much, and don't stop doing what you're doing. I'll try my best to get to people who haven't had their comments read previously, but unfortunately my time, as you all should know by now, is extremely limited, so occasionally I just have to kind of pick the ones that jumped out at me initially, rather than thinking too much about it. But with all that said, we had a comment from Gina, who writes on how Redgrave's episode of the Little Things in Yarnum, wherein he speaks about the bells, how he drew an interesting parallel there between the bells in-game and the Japanese Obon festival. During the Obon season, bells are used to beckon spirits from the underworld, and at the end of the season, the bells are used to send them back. In Bloodborne, we get to see the results of this inspiration when our hunter calls for assistance or is invaded. There is also the Bell Maidens who use the bells to summon enemies to oppose our hunter. The wiki article on Bonso, or Buddhist bells, also notes that the sound of the bell is considered to be calming and can induce an atmosphere, in this case for meditation. I think it's not too much of a stretch to imagine that the Healing Church may use bells to beckon and enthrall ancient Pthumerians. The bells around their necks could further keep them enthralled, the more active they become. Off topic, does anyone else like to pronounce Pthumerian, or Pthumerian, or Pthumerian I guess in this case, with a hard T to make it sound like Tomb Marian, like a person that lives or comes from tombs? I'm stupidly attached to that pronunciation. And when you put it like that, I can certainly see why, because that's quite interesting and rather apt, I think, that we've all been pronouncing it Pthumerian with the soft T but I think it's equally as valid to pronounce it Tumerian, to make that connection explicit, because as best as I can recall, there's no in-game source of pronunciation there. I don't believe any of the dialogue speaks of Thumeru or Thumerians, that it's all just written text, but I could be wrong about that. But either way, I think that's very interesting. I'm unfortunately, I think at this point, much too used to pronouncing it Thumerian, but I do think that pronouncing it with a hard T does, it's a really interesting way of putting it that really reflects what the Thumerians or the Tumerians seem to be. So thank you, Gina, for that. Defying the Genres points out that the small rake-like tool used by some of the fishkin, or the fishmen as they're called in the guide, looks exactly like the deep sea rune. And I feel like that's... and I've had this happen in previous episodes before, where that's something that's so obvious that I feel like I should have pointed it out, or that someone may have already pointed it out previously, but I can't recall whether or not I did. So I did want to thank you, Define the Genres, for bringing that up, which is very interesting. And as Define the Genres points out, the deep sea rune is obviously associated with Kos, and that it seems likely that the inhabitants of the hamlet were influenced, subconsciously or otherwise, by their guardian Great One. On the idea of the Dreamlands being stacked, Jonas writes that the first one is that the layers of the dream world are stacked on top of each other based on when that layer of the dream was added. The Nightmare Frontier at the top, since it is based on Loran, which is ages ago. Then comes the Hamlet, which seems to me to have happened at the height of Bergenworth, before the schism. Below that is the Research Hall, the Hunter's Nightmare, and the Hunter's Dream. Those three kind of muddy the waters a bit in terms of timeline, but it seems to me that they are the beginning, middle, and end to the Healing Church in a way. But the important thing is that there are layers of lands long ago on top of the Nightmare Frontier, or a Nightmare of Mensis that we cannot see. So this adds not only to everything that we discussed in the previous episode, but also to that which we were discussing in this particular episode, that we can look at the structure of these worlds, of these realms, of these lands, and how they're structured in relation to each other. That we could potentially use that as a means of teasing out the temporal situatedness of each of them, when each of them were added, where, if you can even use the term, where in space and time they exist. With an emphasis on the time aspect of it. And I think that this is very interesting. Something else that this got me to think about as well is the connection between amygdala and the brain and neurology, and how, the amygdala is sort of the center of fear in the brain, or at least it is thought to be by neurologists. And this got me thinking also about one of the old episodes, an old episode of Carl Sagan's Cosmos, wherein he relates the structure of the brain, and much of that was based on much older science, because of course the show was made in 1979, and using the science that was current in the decade leading up to that. But he talks about how the brain is built much like a city, in that you have the city center, and you have certain very important functions that are served there, such that you can't exactly tear it down and rebuild it once you come to a new vision for city building. That everything in the city is kind of built outwards. That you have the city center, which is often, much older than everything else, and then it kind of expands outwards, and so, when you look at the suburbs of a large city, the houses that are built there tend to be much newer, built much more recently than those were in the city center. So, I do think that that's an interesting parallel between what we've been discussing, what Jonas has brought up here, and, that idea that, the inner parts of the brain are the more reptilian aspects of humanity, and that as you expand outwards, you get more and more human, I guess, as time goes on. And it does to some degree seem to shed a little bit of light on how these worlds are structured. So thank you very much for that, Jonas. So next we have a comment from Zhao, and I hope I pronounced that right, who was mentioning how a lot of the boss themes in Bloodborne are very reminiscent of the themes that the bosses themselves evoke. And I think that is a point that, is always something that I've loved about the FromSoft games, that the boss music has always seemed appropriate for the boss. Now, obviously, there are some exceptions in Bloodborne's case because not all of the bosses have their own unique themes. Notably, several of the bosses in the Chalice dungeons reuse the same theme over and over again. But for the most part, the music does seem to reflect the context in which these songs are played. And Zhao came across and this is something that we talked about previously in a live stream, the translation, if there is any, to Hail the Nightmare, which, if you'll recall from the Hail the Nightmare episode of the series, when we visited the Yahargul, the Unseen Village, that the song is playing not really in the background, that the song is emanating from behind an inaccessible area where the School of Mensis is attempting to hail the nightmare. And so Zhao provided us with a link to the translation and neatly kind of transcribed it here to someone from GameFAQs named Kitchen Sink. So the lyrics read, at least according to this translation, in English, "Cursed, you pour out your gift. We are tainted, cursed by the beast. Cursed, O Father, I surrender, if you grant it. We are tainted, silver in the shadows of the water. O Mother from blood, redemption, having been laughed at, rouses itself. It is lamented by the waters. Farewell, farewell, we are tainted, in the shadows of the water. Cursed, and the silver of the water, we are tainted, and the silver of the water, with blood, with blood." Next we have a comment from Double DZ, who writes, "Concerning your guys' comment about removing corrupted blood, which soothes us, and its removal leading us to becoming frenzied, could this be an explanation for the relationship between insight and beasthood? We know that beasthood is something inherent or deep within humanity, and that it's possible to become drunk on the soothing blood, which in turn pushes us closer to whatever lies dormant within us. I believe the blood soothes us because it shields us from the eldritch truths. The higher our insight, the more susceptible we are to frenzy. So why not imbibe in the blood, embrace our beasthood, and be soothed of the fears of the unknown/unknowable?" Really apt summation, I think, this comment of a lot of the points that JSF and I were perhaps not so briefly made in the previous episode. So thank you very much for that, Double DC. I think that's, really apt way of putting it. Heirloom writes that we missed the meaning of part of the Hamlet priest's speech. He calls the orphan of Kos the wizened child, that is to say, the child grown old. So I just wanted to clarify that we didn't really miss it, but it was a number of the topics of discussion, if I recall correctly, that we discussed, but that just didn't find its way into the episode in order to keep it from being 5 hours in length. But thank you very much for pointing that out. So Heirloom goes on to write that it has the body of an old man, but stays in its mother's womb. It's a great one in the Dreamlands, but it still has its physical body, and doesn't die and ascend as a proper nightmare until your character defeats it. I'm not sure what you mean by ascend as a proper nightmare, but your point is well made either way. It keeps mourning its lost mother instead of having and losing a child like great ones are supposed to. The Orphan of Kos is stuck in a state of arrested development. Adam Kranz writes, "Thanks for hanging on to that post I made 2 months ago." Adam, such is the nature of this series, so I apologize that at this point it's looking like we're probably not going to be able to get back to it. So I hope that simply reading your comments will suffice, because as you pointed out yourself, your ideas on the Fishing Hamlet have evolved a little bit since you originally made that post. So in terms of a correction, Adam writes, "I'm as guilty of this as anyone, because I called them nautilus shells in my first post, but they're not snails. They're ammonite shells, extinct marine mollusks that are present only in sedimentary rock, sort of like the way we see them in the ceiling of the aquaculture facility. As another point of clarification, there seems to be a distinction in models between the slug-like phantasms, which appear in the Madman's Knowledge / Great One's Wisdom icons, and can also be found on the back of some gravestones in the Forbidden Woods, and the Fishing Hamlet phantasms, which are found in the Fishing Hamlet in barrels, candle holders, and in the aquaculture facility, and produced by the Cos parasite. The slug type always has two protrusions from its head, like a real slug, but the Fishing Hamlet phantasms have a ring of longer threads, which are used as wicks when they're burned. Around their heads, a sort of squid-like body type. Incidentally, just gonna keep plugging the resemblance between the childhood's beginning infant Great One and the Fishing Hamlet phantasms. Apparently I'm the only one who sees it, but it's quite obvious to me. The infant Great One is darker, larger, and has longer tentacles, which all seem consistent with individual growth rather than a change of type, and otherwise the anatomy is identical. I keep saying this because I can't believe it's incidental. Otherwise the infant Great One could resemble the slug phantasms or the celestial children, but I'm not sure what it would mean and would love to see someone follow where it leads. I agree that the sea life organisms are not phantasms. They are distinctly arthropod-like, with multiple pairs of legs that seem to put them closer to vermin than phantasms, at least anatomically. I'm not necessarily convinced of this yet, but a German spy lays out a complete life cycle for the Cos parasite. This is informed by some information From told him in the process of making the guide. I'm under the impression the term aquaculture facility is their informal designation for that building, for instance. He believes the progression goes from the Cos parasite icon, depicted as the meat of a cockle, to these squid-esque phantasms in the aquaculture facility, which somehow enter the ammonite shells and become the female enemies, and then maybe something like Cos? I tried to get him to clarify his sources of information on a lot of this, and some of it is definitely just his own assumptions and inferences. It wasn't totally clear which were From's ideas, to the extent that that matters. I'm not sure I buy it 100%, but the middle section follows, I think, from the environmental storytelling. You see the fishmen excavating ammonite shells at the top of the facility, then the female enemies in the ammonite shells, and more of them proceeding towards the bottom gradually emerging from the shells. As for the link to the Cos parasite icon creature, I think that's more tenuous. It's premised on the Cos parasite L1 animation, which spits a bunch of phantasms on the ground. I interpreted those to be the phantasms inside a lumen wood that it was stimulating rather than the Cos parasite itself. But who knows? Who knows indeed. And the life cycle that Franz apparently laid out. I watched his old Hunter's playthrough, but I don't exactly recall that portion. Part of the reason for that is that, yeah, I used to watch Franz religiously due to the fact that, yeah, he would talk a lot about the lore and a lot about the mechanics, but for the games for which he's worked on the guides, I felt that looking to his channel, relying on it too much for lore, was bound to be problematic for me, just because it was hard to tell at times whether he was just being coy about certain things, whether the things that he's learned actually have any basis in the game, because then whenever, yeah, he's asked for further information, invariably it comes down to, you know, a conflict with non-disclosure agreements. So, yeah, I tend to take, at least insofar as he's worked on the guide for something, I tend to take his assertions on the lore I don't take them too seriously for that reason. And but you know, even if it is 100% like something that was given to him or conveyed to him by FromSoft, that, as Miyazaki himself says, there is room purposely left in the game, there's interpretive space left open, and that is an intentional thing. So I don't think that even if the things he said were true, I don't think that necessarily closes off possibilities for interpreting the story. But it's very, very interesting nevertheless, and I'm very grateful that you brought that up, Adam. In addition to your initial posts, which was very sympathetic to what it seemed to me that you were trying to do, at least in part, trying to allow for the agency of the inhabitants of the fishing hamlet. They weren't just passive vessels that kind of received what was happening to them at the hands of Bergenworth. And yeah, if I'm understanding your intentions correctly. That's something that I very much am sympathetic to, and I'm very grateful that you brought it to my attention. So thanks very much. Okay, again, because I don't have a lot of time this week, and I would like to get this episode out since it's been more than half a month since I released the last episode. But I did want to quickly give a couple of shout-outs. The first of which, I received a message from Rookie B, who very kindly dedicated a Djura speed paint video to me, wherein she creates what is essentially a painting of a reenactment of a screenshot from Bloodborne, and I think it's just really, really cool. And you can see if you click on the link on the screen, it'll take you to that YouTube video and her channel, where I'm led to understand that she'll be doing a few more Bloodborne or Souls related things potentially in the future. So if you're interested in that, I would highly recommend checking that out. And in addition to the Djura speed paint video, which she kindly dedicated to me, she also made this really cool looking Aegon of Astora icon, which the attention to detail I found really amazing. For instance, the fact that I'm wearing Henrik's garb, but that it's also me from one of the streams that I did using the face cam, that she drew, me in Henrik's garb. And so she also did a speed painting video of that, which you can click on the screen and check out at your leisure. Really, really cool, and just a really kind gesture that I very much appreciate and never in a million years expected to happen. So thank you very much for that, Rookie B. Speaking of fan art, although I hesitate to call it fan art, because I don't really consider all of you fans of me as much as we are people who exist together in a community. But Ohio Redshirt, in my most recent stream where I was working on the Brador build that you're now seeing on screen, Ohio Redshirt in the chat posted some images that he was working on, and a potential, a candidate for, while I'm live streaming, I have the whole Rant King Covenant thing, which I think was coined by Dima Parachute, like the Rat King from Dark Souls 2, but I rant a lot, so therefore Rant King Covenant. And Ohio Redshirt asked what my sigil might look like, and the only thing I could come up with was a Bold Hunter's Mark inside of a dark sign, and lo and behold, pretty freaking awesome looking. So I haven't decided with all of these, and I hope that you all will forgive me, that I like to kind of have everything consistent, and when I am making changes to like the look and the feel of the channel, I have to look and see how or whether it'll affect other aspects of it. But I do think that these are just amazing works of art, and I very, very much appreciate it. And finally, several weeks ago, and I apologize that I didn't bring this to everyone's attention sooner, but several weeks ago, Neo Loki, who, if you've been watching the series, you'll recall that name at this point, or you should be familiar with that name, Neo Loki posted another cinematic lore video. This time, the first of what I imagine will be several parts dealing with the Hunter's Nightmare. And if you're at all familiar with Neo Loki's work, you should know that this is a video that you're very much going to want to check out, because it's really, really cool and just incredibly well done. And each time Neo Loki releases a video, they get better and better. So I did want to draw everyone's attention to that. But that's going to do it for this episode, so thank you all very much for joining me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye!